Hi everybody, and welcome to today's or the 2 days seminar we are holding here in HC Andersen and Davis, looking into the green and energy transition business area field with a lot of mid-sized and small cap Nordic shares. Just a little bit housekeeping. You can ask questions down in the box down below. It will probably be more relevant when we are meeting the companies. Also, during the presentation, it will take around 20 minutes. Then we have 5 minutes for questions, and then there will be a 5 minutes break where we switch between the companies. So that's kind of the housekeeping. Out there in the side, you can see a link so you can see the agenda and which companies will be presenting when in the coming 2 days. So that was the housekeeping. Let's jump straight into it. You know, maybe the subject that is highest on the agenda by the whole world right now, not just investors, but of course also investors. They've chosen to call it the green energy transition seminar, and it's because there's been we have kept a lot of seminars focusing on the green transition, but right now it's very clear that this cannot be looked upon. This energy crisis is of course making that you can't probably switch between those two. Of course, in the companies, the business model where they will be in, but this is going to melt together. And my best way of saying that's probably true is looking at kind of the share performance. If we look at the green tech sector, it's up around 20% this year, and the global stock market is down 20% in dollar terms. I know for us European investors, that's a little bit less, but kind of a very big overperformance, only overdone by energy. So it is, I think, kind of being looked in a way. What I've kind of made as the subject line, under investments in energy for a decade, the cracks are now starting to appear. Some might say it's canyons, maybe the Grand Canyons and not just cracks, but I use the words cracks. And under investment is actually a little bit unfair, because the last decade we have actually invested around the same in our energy transition, but we have moved to more green and less black investments. And because of the energy density and how much bang for the bucks we get out of every investment we have made, actually it has meant that we have had a decreasing energy capacity. And yes, it takes an energy crisis. It always takes a crisis to kind of push the problems to the surface. And that is what is happening right now. It is probably also unfair to look at it in this way, because some of the reason why we might have seen that we haven't really solved the problems is that we are still starting to crack the very hard parts of the energy transition in our heavy industry, in our heavy transport, in our building mass and such. It's where it's much harder. And that's around 80% of our energy consumption. We are very far in solving the 20% who goes in electrification, and we are moving further out on the electrification curve. But of course, we are still in the early innings, and we're still pretty early technologies there, therefore also a little bit more expensive. So that's also a part of being there. But let's what I prefer always to do when I make such an investment through this presentation, we will kind of look at why maybe has it gone up 20% this year. Should you invest in it further? And the best way for me is always, what are the biggest investor concerns? And one of the ones I hear most out there is that you have experienced big swings in the last decade. You know, big ups, big downs, often very often driven by the political sentiment, because some parts of the energy or the green transition are now economic sustainable, but some parts are not. So you are still very dependent on economic sentiment, and that has meant that we have seen big ups and downs, and we don't like to see that as investors. We like to see the stable curve, but that's one of the concerns. The other ones I already touched upon as the harder area of transition, the 80% that we still haven't really gotten to dig deep into, which we are talking about, the building mats, our heavy transport, our heavy industry and such. And one part of it of course physics. You know, it's pretty clear, you know, the density of of green energy or other energy solution is a problem. It maybe takes 1,000 times more land to produce green energy than the black alternatives. The density in fuels is often half, so we have this problem with, just look at the batteries. What is the energy density in that? In some of our fuels, what are the energy density if we should convert gas? If you want to make heat out of gas, which is a big part of our industrial production heat, and want to make it out of electricity, it is very, very expensive, and you will have a lot of less effect out of the energy. So it's simply physics why we haven't been able to do this, but we are starting to crack into those also areas, and what I will come into. And then there's always been that it's an expensive sector. The sector growth prospect is already priced in. This secular growth where we are talking about the next 30 years, this is the big investment opportunity in our lifetime, and it's probably true, but how is it priced in? So that is some of the investor concerns I'm looking at it. And if we should try and deal with them and try and explain why maybe we have moved ahead this year, it's the energy crisis, of course, have a very big part of this. I think you can put it kind of very, very simple. Politicians no longer has the comfort to push out problems. We don't have to make 2030 plans, kind of make a hockey stick. Right now, the green energy savings, all part of the energy crisis we are staying in, and it is real, this energy crisis. There's no doubt that our economic growth, how high inflation will go if we start to warm up our economies again, will be some kind of a limiting factor, something we haven't been used to. Of course, exaggerated by the Russian-Ukraine war, but actually with the underinvestment would still have maybe come somehow to the surface. So it's very, very simple. Politicians no longer has the possibility to push that out, have to take something else on the agenda instead of this transition. It is the problem that needs to be solved tomorrow, the day after, and not in a couple of years' time. So I kind of think that solves some of the long versus short-term problem I have been discussing with investors for the last 10 years in this sector. We also see this actually being followed up. Just within 1 year, we have had the Green Deal in Europe, just for that to be around 3 times bigger in the Repower EU, where we have made out the plans to get rid of Russian gas. We have had the Biden part of his inflation agenda to around a little sub to 400 billion. But maybe even more importantly, if you look into some of the details, he has some open-ended tax credits, and he also actually set some targets, I know, further out in the future on a lot of regulatory on the building mass and so on, but still it needs to be followed up there. So it's not only the amount, which was a little bit maybe less than when he went to be a president. And then, of course, we had China, who pledged the 2060, and that sounds long time ago, but actually they have also pledged to peak in 2030. So they need also now to start investments and are starting, and that's around a 21 trillion plan to get them to that. Besides that, the politician has also actually moved faster on the taxonomy, and to put it, taxonomy is the framework the EU will put out. I know it's very complicated, and I don't have the time here, so I will try and make it. It's a framework for what is a green, what is an impact investment. What can you say do good? And what does this mean? Couple that with that, if I had kept this presentation around a half a year ago, I would say we really don't know how fast they're moving. We really don't know how it will look, and we still don't. But actually, they moved on one thing, that is the biggest companies start to report on their impact or emissions already from 2024, and the biggest companies are above 1,000, and then they will follow. So actually, they are moving very fast. And what does this mean? Yeah, but I think that times the political investments, how much we will put in that with many, many times. And that's because companies need to report on it, and greenwashing will be very, very hard. They actually need to do real life investments instead of buying credits and other stuff. And investors on the other side who has actually pledged to make a less emission or less lower their emissions out of their investment portfolio will now have data actually they can do it upon. And that means that the investment will move to the companies following and doing a lot more than others, and that will start a race by companies to really try and make this green energy transition. So I think right now we are in the strongest part where we see the strongest political support, where people are moving ahead and have moved a lot ahead within just 1 year. That should solve some of the short versus long-term issue. The other part is, and we cannot remove this, that as we are moving in to this, what I call the 80% of our energy consumption, that it is very, very hard and expensive to remove right now, and we have the technologies of that in the early stages. There will always be some business case uncertainty, and nothing can remove that technical. We cannot. We can of course invest a lot more and move it faster ahead, but we cannot remove what will be the solutions. But as I see it, politicians, by their big support and their need to do something about it, can keep a hand on it, and that is very often maybe enough for investors. They cannot remove the technological risk, but they can put a hand on it. And where do I see it? Yeah, but I see it in as hydrogen has been a big part of this. This is early technology, but right now it's very, very much supported. We also see it in the carbon capture that is actually being supported. That's a very, very early technology. So politicians are starting to support and help investors with this technology, and thereby business case uncertainty. CO2 prices is the second part we can look at. And if we go down to the CO2 price, strong development. What does this show? Yeah, but this is the CO2 price, and now I'm making it very simple. I know it's also a financial speculative asset, but it shows, are politicians willing to stick to the green agenda and don't give any industries a bigger carbon credit, a way out of jail card? And do the companies believe that the politician will be hard in the future and thereby needing to buy this to secure their... And we've seen a strong price movement. Actually, late August, we saw the highest price ever, 94 euro per ton of CO2. It has come down, and what has brought it down? The big uncertainty that it's also created in the energy markets about what will EU do to cap the prices on electricity. It is part of this, and therefore somewhat of a speculation have gone out. But look at the one. And the second part is, thereby markets and price always is the best determined, not what I say. Market believe the politician, the company needing to buy this, believe the politician that they will continue this and supporting that and be hard. And the second part is, if we touch about 100 euro, I've seen reports saying how many technologies actually over the coming years in the green transition and energy transition will actually be economic sustainable with a carbon credit. Yeah, we still need to make this and do a lot more. But here the answer is actually to our, if we did this and made the carbon credit really, really strong, our technologies would simply find their way to solve the problems. But it's not that good to put in a political election campaign. It's better to say 1 million electric cars, but here the solve are. But technologies at these prices will actually be much, much more economic sustainable and therefore also accelerate. And the last part is what I also touched upon, and what I think we will see from a lot of our companies. Some are in, we are watching, and some are producing energy, but a lot of them is in the energy savings space. And why is this so interesting? Yeah, but you don't have the problem with physics. if we can make energy production run with less energy, if we can run a ship with less energy, if we can run our heavy transport with less energy, we don't have the problem with physics. We just lower our energy, and we put a calendar icon here because it's actually some of the fastest technology to put out, and with the sense of urgency right now. And politicians are starting to acknowledge this. Here we are having the Sønderborg meeting, which IAA have every year, I think, on the energy savings. It was not the highest top. We had Dan Jørgensen, our climate minister, with maybe not the strongest politician in Denmark. But IAA has actually shown a way out. And what this graph shows you is that GDP in Europe could grow by 43%. If we didn't put any energy measures in, we would need 18% more energy. But actually, with energy efficient and only doubling those investments, we can actually run with a less energy demand in the European Union. So this should look very, very attractive to the politician. And a second part, and this is not the European Union who have made a report, but it's the UK, who are also maybe even in more dire straits. They've kind of made someone make a plan and saying, what can we do? How can we get rid of the Russian gas? How can we lower our energy consumptions, or translate out of the 20% they have, 25% they are going? Energy efficiencies all have a 1 year, below 1 year. Solar also, if we go up in nuclear, 13 years, it takes time to build it. Big wind parks and such stuff. Not that we shouldn't do it, but it doesn't solve our short-term problems. But energy efficiency in industry, in our building mass and everything, has 1 to 2 years time frame to get that implemented. And in the current situation, that's very, 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 very important. So energy savings has been, I think, underlooked from investor sides. It has been, everybody has the big focus on energy production, but I actually think that we will see a large switch to energy saving technologies, our recycling of our things. We will also, through the credit carbon system, probably see that some of the hard places where physics simply don't make sense will be moved to us storing it and creating business models beside that, so we don't need to solve the extremely hard physics impossible to make a green transition of our energy. And why especially in Europe, where we are maybe in the biggest dire strait, are we talking about green and energy transition being the same? It's because besides Norway, and of course I know out here in the North Sea we also have some gas, but we really don't have any natural resources. So this one in Europe needs to be a green energy transition. Other places it will be a little bit more of both, so I kind of see that in my world we have addressed some of the investors' concern by all what has happened within just 1 year in this sector, and thereby, in my case, also be interesting for investors to look into, and the share price performance this year, of course, shows that. Should look kind of the valuation in this sector. I will not go too much into it. This is small and mid-cap companies. It is hard to create a framework what you should pay for it. It's around 13 times EV sales. That is the kind of average through it, but it's so dependent. Each company is on technology, the commercialization phase, where are we? Maybe most of all, market and accessibility. How much do you need to push out a current cheap alternative? How competitive are you? Is there a big need for customers in the other end to change the way they do it? And that seems to be kind of the one you should look at, maybe more than the general valuation. But if you want to dig further into it, as you can see out there, there's also a link to our Green Tech Sector report that we just put out. And here we are looking at the companies. So let's jump to the questions. I think I ran to my 20 minutes. There's a question here. Is it possible to succeed both the green transition and energy security? In the short term, both yes and no. I think I will actually use the German example of where they made this big gas deal with Canada. This is a way where they will get the gray hydrogen, meant that it made from natural gas, liquefied. But in doing that, they are building up the infrastructure to switch to green hydrogen in the future. So yeah, I think it's possible, but right now we will see investment in both places. But the smart politicians and the smart money is that they will make those investments so it can actually be the infrastructure for a bigger green transition in the future when technologies are more mature and where we have the production capacity up. So yes, I think it's possible, but you will see that it probably needs a preparation where we use the gray alternatives, especially gas, being able to have the same infrastructure to switch to the green hydrogen. And then there's a question, do you see buy on rumor, sell on fact situation after the announced political support in the green tech investment? Yeah, that's always a risk. We've seen that in the past. But actually, we looked in the green sector report, we looked into what was the damaging to this sector, and we looked to it with NASDAQ. It's very, very clear that, of course, the higher interest is the big risk out there in the market, and of course, the recession risk. And this sector was very, very hard hit by the rising interest and following the NASDAQ sector down, both expensive sectors. But what we looked at, and even before we actually saw the political support starting out from the US, it was actually in May it turned where first the NASDAQ took that the interest needed to drop very heavily to turn around. I know it's now turned around again, but it's very, very interesting. And for me, that tells me that as long as energy, which can be the recession risk is of course some of that, but as long as energy is trading strong, which there's a big sign of that, I actually think this sector will also trade strong this year. And what I'm using is this turning point, that it actually turned before the big political. Of course, it got a lot of extra wind into the sales after the Biden, but it actually turned before, and it turned before the interest. So it's probably trading more with energy. And I don't think I have seen a strategist not talking about that energy is where you should be. So yeah, I think I'm not sure that this is a buy on rumor, sell on facts where we have gotten all the political wind in the sales out, and then everybody will be dropping off. I'm not saying that's interest resistant. I'm not saying it's recession resistant, but I think it will trade pretty stronger on this our demand for that. Will the higher inflation affect the transition to green energy? Yeah, it will. I think politicians need to kind of take a more consideration to the public in the short run. But I think looking at the company's agenda, looking at also the population's agenda, and maybe after the dry summer here or the dry spell we have had all over the world, but especially here in Europe, I think politicians cannot give up on it. I think they need to do both things, but there is a risk that for a short period of time we need to focus only on the prices and the impact on their voters. But I actually think that both in the public and also by politicians, there is a knowledge that we need to do both. So yeah, there is a risk, and we already see it in something like the CO2 price, right? When they start to meddle with the price mechanisms, I actually think maybe, I don't know how they can do it. I'm not sure they can, but I think it's kind of smart to take the speculative part out of the increasing prices. Then it will also affect everything, and the CO2 prices and such stuff. So yeah, there is a risk here. I acknowledge that, but I actually think that there is an agenda that might always that is starting to come on the way. I think my time, unfortunately, is run out, or maybe not, unfortunately. I have spoken long enough. The next company we will present that will start 19:30 will be 2 seconds. I just need to find my agenda. It's Andersen, which has the core strategy to provide a zero-emission energy solution to industries and such, and will be presented by their CEO. So we'll take a short break of 5 minutes, and then we will return with that company.